Please welcome Eric Best, author, strategist.
Thank you, Blaine. Thank you for coming today, all of you who are here. And I don't want to disappoint anyone who thinks that every brief talk needs to begin with an exercise that changes the way you feel forever. So I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about listening. I'm going to make a sound, and I want you to listen to the sound. You can keep your eyes open or closed, but I think they should be closed. I want you to listen to the sound, and the instant that the sound stops, I want you to raise your finger like that, quickly, so I can see for whom the sound stopped and exactly when it stopped. Okay, are you ready? Okay, thank you. Now, it's no surprise that the people furthest away put their fingers up first, because it went away there first. But now you listened with your ears. I want you to try something else. I want you to think about the sound not being a sound. I want you to think about it being meaning. It's the meaning that's coming out of people when they're talking to you. Now, I've done a lot of work in the corporate environment, and I can tell you, particularly if there are a lot of investment bankers or lawyers present in the room, people listen a certain way, fairly closed, and the first words out of their mouth are likely to be, yes, but, which is their way of saying, never mind what you said, listen to what I'm about to say. Now, there's another way of responding, which if you just do it arbitrarily, you'll discover the conversation has changed, and that is to listen with an attitude of yes, and. Now, yes, and assumes you're actually listening for the person's meaning, not to the words. I'm sure you've been in arguments where people have said, but you said. They don't say, but what I understood you to mean, and therefore the reason I reacted this way was this. They say, but you said. And you wonder, well, were they listening to what you meant? So I want you to do this once again. I'm going to make the same sound, but this time I want you to think that the sound is not a sound. It's the meaning inside of what somebody is saying. And I want you to be conscious that this time, when the sound comes into you through your ears, through your head, see if you can take it down in your body, toward your heart, toward your gut, where you feel what people mean. I feel we're talking about this. I feel this conversation is going this way. I feel it's really about that, okay? I'm going to make the sound, listen to the sound, let it come in through your ears, then take it down in your body, and just see if you can listen with your chest openly, okay? As if what you really cared about was the person's meaning, and you weren't getting ready to speak. You were just listening. Okay? One more time. Great. Now, I'll just offer you a suggestion that, in our day-to-day lives, certainly in our work lives, and I've had quite a number of years of experience now in the corporate environment, in rooms of people, not unlike this room, people who are trying to work together towards some purpose, who experience various kinds of frustration. Nobody listens to me, I'm not being acknowledged, I don't get what's going on here. The people up there say we have a strategy, but actually I don't know what it is. And I submit that some of that has to do with the quality of listening that goes on. So if you take away nothing else today, I'd like you to take away two things. The first is that you can listen to another person's meaning and wait for it, and take it in here. And you can choose to respond to them, yes, meaning yes, and there's more we can talk about here that has to do with what you just meant to say, okay? So, let me start there. Years ago, I spent 20 years as a journalist. I've had an odd career. First as a journalist, then as a consultant who learned to do a certain kind of strategy consulting using the future or stories about the future to influence the present. And then I found myself on Wall Street during the 10 most prosperous years that Wall Street probably will ever experience in our lifetime. But as a journalist, I went and listened to this columnist, James Kilpatrick, speak, and James Kilpatrick said, every good piece of writing follows the same formula. let me take you by the hand and show you a place I know, which for seeing will change you forever. Okay, so that's a big ambition, and so my big ambition for today would be, gee, that happens to somebody in this room for some reason, for some single idea that actually changes the way you think or feel forever, because you can take it with you and use it. There are 4 principles that I'm going to talk about today that I came upon unexpectedly, I realized had been about my life before then and would be about my life after that, and so they have been. And in keeping with something an earlier speaker said today, you're here because of every place you've been and because of every place you're going. It's the one thing we're sure of. It's the constant. You're carrying it along. It must be that way. And so how often can you readjust where you've come from and where you're going? If you're a violinist, you probably can't seriously think about being shortstop for the New York Yankees or vice versa. We are what we're becoming. We're doing what we're becoming. As we behave, so we become. And so what are we doing? Well, I didn't know how much I had spent thinking about that and talking about that first as a journalist for 20 years, when your job is really to figure out, what's the story? What's going on here? Whom should I believe? What should I listen to? Why do I believe this and not that? What if I'm wrong? And so it would help if we all acknowledged that we're kind of making it up as we go along. We're taking everything that brought us here, we're trying to apply it, move on, and sometimes we're trying to start over, or come from a new place, or apply a new understanding. So, I'm sometimes asked this question, well, how did you get from being a journalist to being an investment banker? And it's a weird answer and it takes a long time. So I'm going to skip a bunch of parts. I'll just tell you that it so happened in 1996 that I came to New York to try to help Morgan Stanley, which was then a much more successful investment bank than it is today, think about the future, what the internet would mean to financial services. It was a very interesting question to be asking in 1995. And I had come from a small company in California where I'd worked for 5 years, learning to apply this thing called scenario thinking to strategy. In other words, you are acting and operating right now on certain assumptions about your life. You have an official future, if I can call it that. If you were a business, I could deconstruct your business plan and your last year's annual report, and I could tell you something about, quite a lot about actually, what your assumptions are about the future. And yet, it probably won't happen like that. And this insight about the future, it being unpredictable, and the fact that people need to keep adjusting themselves, companies in particular need to keep adjusting themselves for the uncertainties, led me to this work, learning to do scenario thinking, or scenario planning, as some people call it, for a small company in California. Morgan Stanley comes and says, can you help us think about what the internet will mean to financial services? And I feel, fortunate that I happened to be the guy in the slot that day who took the question, and so I came to New York. It was a beautiful fall day in September, I'd say September 25th or so. I was trying to teach myself about living in New York, so I was walking from my apartment at 36 and First. No one told me that's the road everybody leaves on every night. 36 and First across to Times Square. And I just stepped off the curb on Fifth Avenue in front of the public library, and these phrases came into my mind perfectly clearly for the first time, even though I could trace them back to certain sources. And they were as follows. And this is what I would like you to listen for the meaning in this for yourself. 4 principles that can guide a life or a company, I believe. Clarify the intention. Define the sacred. Understand the commitment. Act to be. I'm going to say them again. Clarify the intention. Define the sacred. understand the commitment, act to be. Now, clarify the intention is pretty straightforward. And by the way, most allegedly wise sayings or aphorisms or pieces of advice are pretty easy to articulate. It's in the application that things become more challenging. Clarify the intention. What is it that you want to do, really, no kidding? Today, this week, this month, with your partner, with your life, with your house, with your career. What is it that you want to do? Do you know? Do you feel it's within your power to influence the answer? Do you know what it might be made out of, this thing? When I got ready to go sailing in the ocean for the first time, and I realized my intention was to sail alone in the ocean, suddenly certain things began to become clearer. Like, what did I have to know to do that? This was a trip I made from San Francisco to Hawaii in 1989 on a 47-foot steel ketch that I had bought in 1985. What did I need to know? Was it the right boat? Who could help me? What I discovered at the time was something that many of us have learned along the way. Once you clarify your intention and commit yourself to a course of action, you actually seem to influence the universe around you somehow magically. So people began to come out of the woodwork when they found out I was going to Hawaii alone. One guy showed up on the dock with a piece of surgical tubing and a little book by a Scandinavian, said, "Here, take this, you'll need this, your self-steering is going to break." Now, if you never sailed alone, you don't know what self-steering is, I'll just tell you there's a mechanical device on the back of the boat that many sailors who use it end up naming after their mother, because it's the thing that will take care of you under all conditions. Well, I said, no, it's not going to break. I have a very good one. No, he said, it'll break, and when it does, you'll need this. And I won't go into details, but on the way back from Hawaii, 500 miles from Hawaii and 2,000 miles from San Francisco, my self-steering broke. And because I had the right piece of surgical tubing, which I never would have thought of on my own, and this little book by the Scandinavian who said, persist, persist, persist. You can do this. Which, believe me, if you try to do this, you realize that's the best advice. Persist. I was able to sail the last 2,000 miles without a proper self-steering device. My point is, clarify the intention. What am I trying to do? What would it take to get there? And that leads me to the second thing. Define the sacred. Now, in corporate strategy work, it's commonplace to try to help a company figure out where they're trying to go. When I came to Morgan Stanley in the late 90s, they merged with Dean Witter. The new company didn't really know what it was going to try to become, and I ran a process to try to help them come up with a vision for the new company. Dean Witter had been all about retail, investors. Morgan Stanley was all about institutional finance. It was really like getting... it's too close to say it was like trying to get two Indian tribes together. It was really trying to get two very, very different cultures to come together. What I learned at that time is that vision matters. Call it what you like, but vision really matters for people and for institutions, for companies. Vision is something over the horizon that says, this is where we're trying to get. It's much bigger than a bread box. The head of Sony at one time had a vision that Sony would change the reputation of Japan in the world with the quality of its products. That's a vision. Visionary companies, it turns out, are 6 times more profitable than non-visionary companies. So you'd think everybody would do it, but they don't. And no visionary company is successful without core values. Well, what are core values? I've heard people say, oh yeah, everybody's got core values. You look at corporate core values, they're all the same core values, to which I say yes, and the Bible's got 10 commandments. So I guess we're done with that. It's not about what are the commandments, it's what are you doing with the core values. Companies have to have them, people have to have them. There have to be certain things that you believe deeply that you're not going to put aside for anybody else. You're not going to quit doing that because the audience is hostile. It's something you deeply believe. And visions don't get fulfilled without core values. And I'm not going to go into mine, although we could talk about those later. You have to live them. You have to behave them. You have to make them real in your own life. The third thing I said was, understand the commitment, the third principle. Understand the commitment. It's really no good being clear about your intention and committed to a set of values if you don't know what it takes to actually do that. If you work in the corporate environment across a range of companies, you will find people who pay lip service. Executives who say, we have a strategy, but actually nobody knows what it is. Or they say, we have a strategy and we have core values, but if you actually go talk to the people in the company, they say, well, that's really not the way it is around here. And if you look back at the history of Wall Street through the 90s and into 2000, you'll find stories that make it very clear that many of the companies that were saying we're client-centric, were exploiting their clients at every turn, or virtually every turn, in every way they could. The companies talk about transparency, but they weren't transparent. They talk about service, but they weren't actually serving. And in my opinion, much of the dissatisfaction or alienation or lack of connection that people feel in the business place is actually due to the fact that either this organization doesn't have a vision, doesn't have values, or it says it does, but it doesn't behave it. It claims it, it doesn't live it, and so they can never connect. It's always been very interesting to me that in research that's done in human resource, in the human resource area, if you can tell me for sure that a company has a vision and has core values, and this person over here has the same core values, it's almost assured they'll be very successful in the company. And it's reasonably assured that the company will be successful as well. But there's a question about the commitment. Using my own personal story of the sailing, I realized, okay, I really need to sail alone because of things that had happened in my life. I need to find out who will I be. You know, as it turns out, if you sail to Hawaii and back, on the way back you come north until you get a little bit above where San Francisco is, and then you turn right. Well, somewhere in there you're as far from land as you can be on Earth as kind of a mathematical possibility. And I, for a variety of reasons, thought, well, I need to go there and see what that's like. But what I discovered was that the commitment was a big commitment, and it required that I learn a lot about myself, about the boat, about the mechanics, learn as much as I could from other people, and then I had a chance to maybe do it. Otherwise, there was an old sailor who offered me the line, "The sea lies in wait for the unwary, but she stalks the reckless," which was kind of scary by itself. But it's reckless not to be prepared, not to know what the commitment is, to deliver on what you say. This is where I want to go. This is why I'm doing it. This is what I deeply believe. I'm not going to give up, no matter what anybody says or what the pressures are on me. Okay, the last one is, perhaps my favorite. And earlier today, we in this room witnessed an exercise of somebody pushing someone to say, what is the problem? What is the problem? What do you want to do? What would it take to do it? What would you have to do? How much time do you want to give to yourself? When will you get that done? And it's perfectly in keeping with the last of the four principles, act to be. So if you've studied French philosophy, you know that, well, that sounds like the existentialist thing, isn't it? Well, yes, it is, and I believe that. We are becoming as we behave. We are as we do. Talk is cheap. Walk the walk. Act to be. When I sailed to Hawaii, I had made an agreement with the San Francisco Examiner at the time that, okay, I'll sail to Hawaii and I'll write a story about that. You get one story. I'll get to Hawaii and I'll find some kind of business story because I'd been the business editor there for a while at that time. And you'll get a second story, and then you owe me vacation and I'll just sail home. And incredibly, they went for that. So I arrived in Hawaii looking for a business story, and I discovered that on the island of Lanai, the old Hawaiian way of life was giving way to 2 modern hotels and a big golf course built by a quite controversial developer named David Murdoch. The islanders were saying he's destroying our way of life, and his people were saying, no, we're bringing prosperity to a primitive land. So I tracked him down in his amazing office in Honolulu to ask him, well, what is it? So David Murdoch had a very difficult life. He grew up to be one of those businessmen who just seemed to know how to get a lot done. And he defended himself. He said, look, I'm not ruining a way of life. I'm building something. I'm making something happen. And I've done that all my life. So setting aside the question of, is this the right thing in Lanai? He said, It's not wrong to have an ego. It's wrong to have no ego. And this is something that you understand because you decided to do something and you did it, and now it's part of you. Act to be. Act to be. And the way he said it, and the simplicity with which he said it, really made me stop and think, what is that about? And so it's the fourth of my 4 principles, because as I've gone through corporate life and worked with companies and individuals, they are trying to get to the place of actually acting to be the person they want to be, the company they want to be, have the life they want to have. And it requires that last step, on top of the intention, on top of what's sacred to them, on top of the commitment they have to make, or underneath it all, you could say, they have to act to be. So if you take away one thing today, it could be listen with this part of your body for the meaning. It could be yes, and try it with your significant other every day for a week. Or it could be clarify your intention, define the sacred, understand the commitment, act to be. Thank you very much indeed.